Part 1 of Chapter 8 of Mysticism and Logic and Other Essays by Bertrand Russell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Landon D.C. Elkind at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa. The relation of sense data to physics. 1. The problem stated. Physics is said to be an empirical science based upon observation and experiment. It is supposed to be verifiable, that is, capable of calculating beforehand results subsequently confirmed by observation and experiment. What can we learn by observation and experiment? Nothing so far as physics is concerned, except immediate data of sense, certain patches of color, sounds, tastes, smells, and so on, with certain spatiotemporal relations. The supposed contents of the physical world are at first blush very different from these. Molecules have no color, atoms make no noise, electrons have no taste, and corpuscles do not even smell. If such objects are to be verified, it must be solely through their relation to sense data. They must have some kind of correlation with sense data, and must be verifiable through their correlation alone. But how is the correlation itself ascertained? A correlation can only be ascertained empirically by the correlated objects being constantly found together. But in our case, only one term of the correlation, namely the sensible term, is ever found. The other seems essentially incapable of being found. Therefore, it would seem the correlation with objects of sense, by which physics was to be verified, is itself utterly and forever unverifiable. There are two ways of avoiding this result. 1. We may say that we know some principle a priori, without the need of empirical verification, for example, that our sense data have causes other than themselves, and that something can be known about these causes by inference from their effects. This way has been often adopted by philosophers. It may be necessary to adopt this way to some extent, but insofar as it is adopted, physics ceases to be empirical or based upon experiment and observation alone. Therefore, this way is to be avoided as much as possible. 2. We may succeed in actually defining the objects of physics as functions of sense data. Just insofar as physics leads to expectations, this must be possible, since we can only expect what can be experienced. And insofar as the physical state of affairs is inferred from sense data, it must be capable of expression as a function of sense data. The problem of accomplishing this expression leads to much interesting logico-mathematical work. In physics as commonly set forth, sense data appear as functions of physical objects. When such and such waves impinge upon the eye, we see such and such colors, and so on. But the waves are in fact inferred from the colors, not vice versa. Physics cannot be regarded as validly based upon empirical data until the waves have been expressed as functions of the colors and other sense data. Thus, if physics is to be verifiable, we are faced with the following problem. Physics exhibits sense data as functions of physical objects, but verification is only possible if physical objects can be exhibited as functions of sense data. We have, therefore, to solve the equations giving sense data in terms of physical objects, so as to make them instead give physical objects in terms of sense data. 2. Characteristics of sense data. When I speak of a sense datum, I do not mean the whole of what is given in sense at one time. I mean rather such a part of the whole as might be singled out by attention, particular patches of color, particular noises, and so on. There is some difficulty in deciding what is to be considered one sense datum. Often attention causes divisions to appear where, so far as can be discovered, there were no divisions before. An observed complex fact, such as that this patch of red is to the left of that patch of blue, is also to be regarded as a datum from our present point of view. Epistemologically, it does not differ greatly from a simple sense datum as regards its function in giving knowledge. Its logical structure is very different, however, from that of sense. Sense gives acquaintance with particulars, and is thus a two-term relation in which the object can be named but not asserted, and is inherently incapable of truth or falsehood, whereas the observation of a complex fact, which may be suitably called perception, is not a two-term relation, but involves the propositional form on the object side, and gives knowledge of a truth, not mere acquaintance with a particular. This logical difference, important as it is not very relevant to our present problem, and it will be convenient to regard the data of perception as included among sense data for the purposes of this paper. It is to be observed that the particulars which are constituents of a datum of perception are always sense data in the strict sense. Concerning sense data, we know that they are there while they are data, and this is the epistemological basis of all our knowledge of external particulars. The meaning of the word external, of course, raises problems which will concern us later. We do not know, except by means of more or less precarious inferences, whether the objects which are at one time sense data continue to exist at times when they are not data. Sense data at the times when they are data are all that we directly and primitively know of the external world. Hence, in epistemology, the fact that they are data is all important. But the fact that they are all that we directly know gives, of course, no presumption that they are all that there is. If we could construct an impersonal metaphysic, independent of the accidents of our knowledge and ignorance, the privileged position of the actual data would probably disappear, and they would probably appear as a rather haphazard selection from a mass of objects more or less like them. In saying this, I assume only that it is probable that there are particulars with which we are not acquainted. Thus, the special importance of sense data is in relation to epistemology, not to metaphysics. In this respect, physics is to be reckoned as metaphysics. It is impersonal, and nominally pays no special attention to sense data. It is only when we ask how physics can be known that the importance of sense data re-emerges. 3. Sensibilia. I shall give the name sensibilia to those objects which have the same metaphysical and physical status as sense data, without necessarily being data to any mind. Thus, the relation of a sensible to a sense datum is like that of a man to a husband. A man becomes a husband by entering into the relation of marriage, and similarly, a sensibile becomes a sense datum by entering into the relation of acquaintance. It is important to have both terms, for we wish to discuss whether an object which is at one time a sense datum can still exist at a time when it is not a sense datum. We cannot ask, can sense data exist without being given? For that is like asking, can husbands exist without being married? We must ask, can sensibilia exist without being given? And also, can a particular sensibile be at one time a sense datum and at another not? Unless we have the word sensibile as well as the word sense datum, such questions are apt to entangle us in trivial logical puzzles. It will be seen that all sense data are sensibilia. It is a metaphysical question whether all sensibilia are sense data, and an epistemological question whether there exist means of inferring sensibilia which are not data from those that are. A few preliminary remarks, to be amplified as we proceed, will serve to elucidate the use which I propose to make of sensibilia. I regard sense data as not mental, and as being, in fact, part of the actual subject matter of physics. There are arguments, shortly to be examined, for their subjectivity, but these arguments seem to me only to prove physiological subjectivity, that is, causal dependence on the sense organs, nerves, and brain. The appearance which a thing presents to us is causally dependent upon these, in exactly the same way as it is dependent upon intervening fog or smoke or coloured glass. Both dependences are contained in the statement that the appearance which a piece of matter presents when viewed from a given place is a function not only of the piece of matter, but also of the intervening medium. The terms used in this statement, matter, viewed from a given place, appearance, intervening medium, will all be defined in the course of the present paper. We have not the means of ascertaining how things appear from places not surrounded by brain and nerves and sense organs, because we cannot leave the body. But continuity makes it not unreasonable to suppose that they present some appearance at such places. Any such appearance would be included among sensibilia, if, per impossible, there were a complete human body with no mind inside it. All those sensibilia would exist in relation to that body, which would be sense data if there were a mind in the body. What the mind adds to sensibilia, in fact, is merely awareness. Everything else is physical or physiological. 4. Sense data are physical. Before discussing this question, it will be well to define the sense in which the terms mental and physical are to be used. The word physical in all preliminary discussions is to be understood as meaning what is dealt with by physics. Physics, it is plain, tells us something about some of the constituents of the actual world. What these constituents are may be doubtful, but it is they that are to be called physical, whatever their nature may prove to be. The definition of the term mental is more difficult, and can only be satisfactorily given after many difficult controversies have been discussed and decided. For present purposes, therefore, I must content myself with assuming a dogmatic answer to these controversies. I shall call a particular mental when it is aware of something, and I shall call a fact mental when it contains a mental particular as a constituent. It will be seen that the mental and physical are not necessarily mutually exclusive, although I know of no reason to suppose that they overlap. The doubt as to the correctness of our definition of the mental is of little importance to our present discussion. For what I am concerned to maintain is that sense data are physical, and this being granted, it is a matter of indifference in our present inquiry whether or not they are also mental. Although I do not hold with Mach and James and the New Realists that the difference between the mental and the physical is merely one of arrangement, yet what I have to say in the present paper is compatible with their doctrine and might have been reached from their standpoint. In discussions of sense data, two questions are commonly confused, namely, 1. Do sensible objects persist when we are not sensible of them? In other words, do sensibilia which are data at a certain time sometimes continue to exist at times when they are not data? And 2. Are sense data mental or physical? I propose to assert that sense data are physical, while yet maintaining that they probably never persist unchanged after ceasing to be data. The view that they do not persist is often thought, quite erroneously in my opinion, to imply that they are mental, and this has, I believe, been a potent source of confusion in regard to our present problem. If there were, as some have held, a logical impossibility in sense data persisting after ceasing to be data, that certainly would tend to show that they were mental. But if, as I contend, their non-persistence is merely a probable inference from empirically ascertained causal laws, then it carries no such implication with it, and we are quite free to treat them as part of the subject matter of physics. Logically, a sense datum is an object, a particular of which the subject is aware. It does not contain the subject as part, as for example beliefs and volitions do. The existence of the sense datum is therefore not logically dependent upon that of the subject. For the only way, so far as I know, in which the existence of A can be logically dependent upon the existence of B is when B is part of A. There is therefore no a priori reason why a particular which is a sense datum should not persist after it has ceased to be a datum, nor why other similar particulars should not exist without ever being data. The view that sense data are mental is derived, no doubt, in part from their physiological subjectivity, but in part also from a failure to distinguish between sense data and sensations. By a sensation, I mean the fact consisting in the subject's awareness of the sense datum. Thus, a sensation is a complex of which the subject is a constituent, and which, therefore, is mental. The sense datum, on the other hand, stands over against the subject as that external object of which in sensation the subject is aware. It is true that the sense datum is, in many cases, in the subject's body, but the subject's body is as distinct from the subject as tables and chairs are, and is, in fact, merely a part of the material world. So soon, therefore, as sense data are clearly distinguished from sensations, and as their subjectivity is recognized to be physiological, not psychical, the chief obstacles in the way of regarding them as physical are removed. 5. Sensibilia and things. But if sensibilia are to be recognized as the ultimate constituents of the physical world, a long and difficult journey is to be performed before we can arrive either at the thing of common sense or at the matter of physics. The supposed impossibility of combining the different sense data which are regarded as appearances of the same thing to different people has made it seem as though these sensibilia must be regarded as mere subjective phantasms. A given table will present to one man a rectangular appearance, while to another it appears to have two acute angles and two obtuse angles. To one man it appears brown, while to another, towards whom it reflects the light, it appears white and shiny. It is said, not wholly without plausibility, that these different shapes and different colors cannot coexist simultaneously in the same place, and cannot therefore both be constituents of the physical world. This argument, I must confess, appeared to me until recently to be irrefutable. The contrary opinion has, however, been ably maintained by Dr. T.P. Noon in an article entitled "Are Secondary Qualities Independent of Perception?" Footnote 1, Proceedings of the Aristotelian Society, 1909 to 1910, pages 191 to 218. End of footnote 1. The supposed impossibility derives its apparent force from the phrase "in the same place," and it is precisely in this phrase that its weakness lies. The conception of space is too often treated in philosophy, even by those who on reflection would not defend such treatment, as though it were as given, simple, and unambiguous as Kant, in his Psychological Innocence, supposed. It is the unperceived ambiguity of the word place which, as we shall shortly see, has caused the difficulties to realists and given an undeserved advantage to their opponents. Two places of different kinds are involved in every sense datum, namely the place at which it appears and the place from which it appears. These belong to different spaces, although, as we shall see, it is possible with certain limitations to establish a correlation between them. What we call the different appearances of the same thing to different observers are each in a space private to the observer concerned. No place in the private world of one observer is identical with a place in the private world of another observer. There is therefore no question of combining the different appearances in the one place, and the fact that they cannot all exist in one place affords, accordingly, no ground whatever for questioning their physical reality. The thing of common sense may in fact be identified with the whole class of its appearances where, however, we must include among appearances not only those which are actual sense data, but also those sensibilia, if any, which, on grounds of continuity and resemblance, are to be regarded as belonging to the same system of appearances, although there happen to be no observers to whom they are data. An example may make this clearer. Suppose there are a number of people in a room, all seeing, as they say, the same tables and chairs, walls, and pictures. No two of these people have exactly the same sense data, yet there is sufficient similarity among their data to enable them to group together certain of these data as appearances of one thing to several spectators, and others as appearances of another thing. Besides the appearances which a given thing in the room presents to the actual spectators, there are, we may suppose, other appearances which it would present to other possible spectators. If a man were to sit down between two others, the appearance which the room would present to him would be intermediate between the appearances which it presents to the two others. And although this appearance would not exist, as it is, without the sense organs, nerves, and brain of the newly arrived spectator, still it is not unnatural to suppose that, from the position which he now occupies, some appearance of the room existed before his arrival. This supposition, however, need merely be noticed and not insisted upon. Since the thing cannot, without indefensible partiality, be identified with any single one of its appearances, it came to be thought of as something distinct from all of them, and underlying them. But by the principle of Occam's razor, if the class of appearances will fulfill the purposes for the sake of which the thing was invented by the prehistoric metaphysicians to whom common sense is due, economy demands that we should identify the thing with the class of its appearances. It is not necessary to deny a substance or substratum underlying these appearances. It is merely expedient to abstain from asserting this unnecessary entity. Our procedure here is precisely analogous to that which has swept away from the philosophy of mathematics the useless menagerie of metaphysical monsters with which it used to be infested. 6. Constructions versus inferences. Before proceeding to analyze and explain the ambiguities of the word place, a few general remarks on method are desirable. The supreme maxim in scientific philosophizing is this: whenever possible, logical constructions are to be substituted for inferred entities. Some examples of the substitution of construction for inference in the realm of mathematical philosophy may serve to elucidate the uses of this maxim. Take first the case of irrationals. In old days, irrationals were inferred as the supposed limits of series of rationals which had no rational limit. But the objection to this procedure was that it left the existence of irrationals merely optative, and for this reason the stricter methods of the present day no longer tolerate such a definition. We now define an irrational number as a certain class of ratios, thus constructing it logically by means of ratios, instead of arriving at it by a doubtful inference from them. Take again the case of cardinal numbers. Two equally numerous collections appear to have something in common. This something is supposed to be their cardinal number. But so long as the cardinal number is inferred from the collections, not constructed in terms of them, its existence must remain in doubt, unless in virtue of a metaphysical postulate ad hoc. By defining the cardinal number of a given collection as the class of all equally numerous collections, we avoid the necessity of this metaphysical postulate, and thereby remove a needless element of doubt from the philosophy of arithmetic. A similar method, as I have shown elsewhere, can be applied to classes themselves, which need not be supposed to have any metaphysical reality, but can be regarded as symbolically constructed fictions. The method by which the construction proceeds is closely analogous in these and all similar cases. Given a set of propositions nominally dealing with the supposed inferred entities, we observe the properties which are required of the supposed entities in order to make these propositions true. By dint of a little logical ingenuity, we then construct some logical function of less hypothetical entities which has the requisite properties. This constructed function we substitute for the supposed inferred entities, and thereby obtain a new and less doubtful interpretation of the body of propositions in question. This method, so fruitful in the philosophy of mathematics, will be found equally applicable in the philosophy of physics, where, I do not doubt, it would have been applied long ago, but for the fact that all who have studied this subject hitherto have been completely ignorant of mathematical logic. I myself cannot claim originality in the application of this method to physics, since I owe the suggestion and the stimulus for its application entirely to my friend and collaborator, Dr. Whitehead, who is engaged in applying it to the more mathematical portions of the region intermediate between sense data and the points, instants, and particles of physics. A complete application of the method which substitutes constructions for inferences would exhibit matter wholly in terms of sense data, and even, we may add, of the sense data of a single person, since the sense data of others cannot be known without some element of inference. This, however, must remain for the present an ideal, to be approached as nearly as possible, but to be reached, if at all, only after a long preliminary labour, of which, as yet, we can only see the very beginning. The inferences which are unavoidable can, however, be subjected to certain guiding principles. In the first place, they should always be made perfectly explicit, and should be formulated in the most general manner possible. In the second place, the inferred entities should, whenever this can be done, be similar to those whose existence is given, rather than, like the Kantian Ding an sich, something wholly remote from the data which nominally support the inference. The inferred entities which I shall allow myself are of two kinds: (a) the sense data of other people, in favour of which there is the evidence of testimony, resting ultimately upon the analogical argument in favour of minds other than my own; (b) the sensibilia which would appear from places where there happen to be no minds, and which I suppose to be real, although they are no one's data. Of these two classes of inferred entities, the first will probably be allowed to pass unchallenged. It would give me the greatest satisfaction to be able to dispense with it, and thus establish physics upon a solipsistic basis. But those, and I fear they are the majority, in whom the human affections are stronger than the desire for logical economy, will no doubt not share my desire to render solipsism scientifically satisfactory. The second class of inferred entities raises much more serious questions. It may be thought monstrous to maintain that a thing can present any appearance at all in a place where no sense organs and nervous structure exist through which it could appear. I do not myself feel the monstrosity. Nevertheless, I should regard these supposed appearances only in the light of a hypothetical scaffolding, to be used while the edifice of physics is being raised, though possibly capable of being removed as soon as the edifice is completed. These sensibilia, which are not data to anyone, are therefore to be taken rather as an illustrative hypothesis and as an aid in preliminary statement than as a dogmatic part of the philosophy of physics in its final form. 7. Private space and the space of perspectives. We have now to explain the ambiguity in the word place, and how it comes that two places of different sorts are associated with every sense datum, namely the place at which it is and the place from which it is perceived. The theory to be advocated is closely analogous to Leibniz's monadology. from which it differs chiefly in being less smooth and tidy. The first fact to notice is that, so far as can be discovered, no sensible is ever a datum to two people at once. The things seen by two different people are often closely similar, so similar that the same words can be used to denote them, without which communication with others concerning sensible objects would be impossible. But in spite of this similarity, it would seem that some difference always arises from difference in the point of view. Thus, each person, so far as his sense data are concerned, lives in a private world. This private world contains its own space, or rather spaces, for it would seem that only experience teaches us to correlate the space of sight with the space of touch, and with the various other spaces of other senses. This multiplicity of private spaces, however, though interesting to the psychologist, is of no great importance in regard to our present problem, since a merely solipsistic experience enables us to correlate them into the one private space, which embraces all our own sense data. The place at which a sense datum is a place in private space. This place, therefore, is different from any place in the private space of another percipient. For if we assume, as logical economy demands, that all position is relative, a place is only definable by the things in or around it, and therefore the same place cannot occur in two private worlds which have no common constituent. The question, therefore, of combining what we call different appearances of the same thing in the same place does not arise, and the fact that a given object appears to different spectators to have different shapes and colours affords no argument against the physical reality of all these shapes and colours. In addition to the private spaces belonging to the private worlds of different percipients, there is, however, another space, in which one whole private world counts as a point, or at least as a spatial limit. This might be described as the space of points of view, since each private world may be regarded as the appearance which the universe presents from a certain point of view. I prefer, however, to speak of it as the space of perspectives, in order to obviate the suggestion that a private world is only real when someone views it. And for the same reason, when I wish to speak of a private world without assuming a percipient, I shall call it a perspective. We have now to explain how the different perspectives are ordered in one space. This is effected by means of the correlated sensibilia, which are regarded as the appearances in different perspectives of one and the same thing. By moving and by testimony, we discover that two different perspectives, though they cannot both contain the same sensibilia, may nevertheless contain very similar ones, and the spatial order of a certain group of sensibilia in a private space of one perspective is found to be identical with, or very similar to, the spatial order of the correlated sensibilia in the private space of another perspective. In this way, one sensibile in one perspective is correlated with one sensibile in another. Such correlated sensibilia will be called appearances of one thing. In Leibniz's monadology, since each monad mirrored the whole universe, there was in each perspective a sensibile, which was an appearance of each thing. In our system of perspectives, we make no such assumption of completeness. A given thing will have appearances in some perspectives, but presumably not in certain others. The thing being defined as the class of its appearances, if kappa is the class of perspectives in which a certain thing theta appears, then theta is a member of the multiplicative class of kappa, kappa being a class of mutually exclusive classes of sensibilia. And similarly, a perspective is a member of the multiplicative class of the things which appear in it. The arrangement of perspectives in a space is effected by means of the differences between the appearances of a given thing in the various perspectives. Suppose, say, that a certain penny appears in a number of different perspectives. In some it looks larger, and in some smaller. In some it looks circular, in others it presents the appearance of an ellipse of varying eccentricity. We may collect together all those perspectives in which the appearance of the penny is circular. These we will place on one straight line, ordering them in a series by the variations in the apparent size of the penny. Those perspectives in which the penny appears as a straight line of a certain thickness will similarly be placed upon a plane, though in this case there will be many different perspectives in which the penny is of the same size. When one arrangement is completed, these will form a circle concentric with the penny, and be ordered as before by the apparent size of the penny. By such means, all those appearances in which the penny presents a visual appearance can be arranged in a three-dimensional spatial order. Experience shows that the same spatial order of perspectives would have resulted if, instead of the penny, we had chosen any other thing which appeared in all the perspectives in question, or any other method of utilizing the differences between the appearances of the same things in different perspectives. It is this empirical fact which has made it possible to construct the one all-embracing space of physics. The space whose construction has just been explained, and whose elements are whole perspectives, will be called perspective space.
End of Part 1 of Chapter 8.